The Seahawks are a week and a half into training camp, and they are just 2 sleeps away from their padded mock game at Lumen Field on Saturday. And with each passing practice, we find out more about the players on this roster, and in particular, about some of the young players. And that's what I'm going to highlight today. Some guys that might be on the verge of breakouts, and I'll include some comments from teammates, coaches, and even some of the reporters that cover the team, and even a national voice chiming in as well. Today's video is brought to you by BetUS. BetUS features live wagering on all NFL games, and right now they are offering a 125% sign-up bonus up to $2,000. To sign up and take advantage of this offer, just click the highlighted link down below in the comments. I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Let's go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Be sure to hit that thumbs up video or that thumbs up button on the YouTube video. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell for notification of future episodes. There are other ways that you can support the channel, and I will list all of those and link them down below as well. So one of the things that I get the most questions about are specific players. And this time of year, it's understandable. We want as much information as we can about how the guys on our team are shaping up, right? And what sometimes the names that reporters choose to focus on are obvious. And some guys slip through the cracks, right? Now, I'm not a credentialed reporter. I'm not able to go to every practice and stand on the sidelines, but I rely on those that are. I have many of them on the show, and it's pretty much the first thing I do every morning is I get up and read what's being written about this team. And so, to borrow an old cliche, I read all those reports so that you don't have to. But over the course of this week, a couple things have stood out to me. That there are some players that are getting talked about that maybe up until this week hadn't been. The difference is the pads went on this week. The gloves came off. And we've talked a couple of times in the last few episodes. And again, I just want to say before we get started, thanks again to G. Scott for his appearance on Monday. Tremendous response to that interview. One of the most fun interviews I've ever done. And G's support for the show has been fantastic. Thank all of you for getting into the comments as well. If you haven't checked out that video, please do. But the pads change things, right? Things are different, especially up front. We just don't get an idea about some of the linemen until the pads go on, especially those offensive linemen. And so it was almost like we were just kind of sitting at the starting gate waiting to get going until we find out about those guys. But now we're starting to find out. And so what I thought I would do is narrow this down. I think I've got 5 or 6 names here of guys that have had some observations made about them and their performance in camp, particularly this week, that have stood out to me and I think should be cause for great optimism among the Seahawk fan base. I asked in that G. Scott video at the end of it, to chime in with any questions about players that you were curious about, and I would find out what I could from my media contacts. And a couple of the names that were asked about, I'm going to address today. And oddly enough, one of them in particular, I hadn't heard much about at all until a viewer asked me about it, and then got some information within hours in a printed report. So let's get into it. And I'll just preface it by saying this as well. This list could be 25 players long. And some of that, it's all great, right? But some of it is also the kind of stuff that you see coming out of every single training camp around the league. Nobody's playing games yet. Everyone's positive. It's like the old baseball spring training adage, that everyone thinks they can win the World Series. Everyone reports to camp in the best shape of their lives, and they've made some adjustments, and they're ready to. So there's a lot of that, and I tried to filter through some of that. Like, for instance, I'm not going to talk about Geno Smith because I want to focus on the young guys, first of all. But you don't have to look very far to find report after report from anyone who's watched practice with this team and from his teammates about what a spectacular camp Geno Smith is having, not just from a passing precision standpoint, but also from a leadership standpoint. There were also some very, very encouraging reports this week after the pads went on about Sam Howell's performance after a first week of practice in which I believe one description was he was wildly inaccurate. And so he's had a better week, but I'm not going to talk about him this week or today either, because I wanted to focus on some guys that have been flying kind of under the radar and that we hadn't heard much about. I'm going to start, and this guy doesn't count as under the radar, but he certainly counts as someone that until the pads went on, you just don't get to see it as much. And that's the Seahawks first round draft pick this year, Byron Murphy, defensive tackle out of Texas, the 16th overall pick. Up until Monday, and the Seahawks practiced in pads, shoulder pads anyway, Monday and Tuesday. Up until Monday, all we could see from Byron Murphy is individual drills and blocking sled stuff. Now, that being said, I have said on the show, I have never been more impressed with how someone looks on a blocking sled than I have Byron Murphy, at least not a Seahawk. Just his quickness, the punch with his hands, and his lateral ability in that first step, his ability to shed, to engage with the blocking sled, shed it, and then get off, impressive. But once the pads went on, and in particular, in the one-on-one passing drills, by all accounts, Byron Murphy was really good. And in fact, Greg Bell, the Tacoma News Tribune, he's been on the show, said he dominated in one-on-one pass rush drills both Monday and Tuesday, regardless of who he was going up against. And then Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated he's on his training camp tour, and he stopped into the VMAC, I think, on Tuesday. And he raved as well at length about Byron Murphy and how he looked. And then he said, quote, he looks like a good bet long-term to play the role that Justin Madubuike did for Macdonald as the 3 technique in Baltimore. And he went on to say that he also reminds him of Grady Jarrett, the former Atlanta Falcons standout, who was a guy that more than one draft analyst comped as a good comparison point for Murphy when he was drafted in the first round. Hey, if he gets the role of Justin Madubuike and turns out to be the player that Madubuike turned out to be, not only is he going to make a bunch of money, but that's a great sign for the Seahawks moving forward. It's been a while since they've had a young defensive tackle that has really, really blossomed. So great news this week. Now that the pad's on, Byron Murphy, the first round pick, certainly looks like he's going to be a big part of the rotation as a rookie and looks ready to make an impact. And also remember, too, that after minicamp, Mike Macdonald kind of challenged Murphy a little bit. There was the one comment near the end of, I think it was mandatory minicamp, about how he could get in better shape so that we could really see the kind of long-term, full game type energy and explosion that we need from him. And understandable. Draft season is weird for these guys. And then after you're drafted, especially in the first round, there's a bunch of media appearances and promotional things you have to do, and seminars and classes that the league puts on that you have to attend, press conferences. It certainly seems like he made the most out of that 6 weeks off between mandatory minicamp and training camp, and then he's ready to go. All right, another name, and a guy that it was really good to hear some platitudes about, because running backs can't really show much either until the pads go on, right? That first week of training camp is all kind of about the quarterbacks, the receivers, and the secondary, because that's really all you can focus on, accurately anyway. But Kenneth Walker is starting to draw some raves, and I wonder how much of a chip on his shoulder this young man's going to have heading into this season. You know, during the offseason, leading up to the season, you start to see all the rankings, right? PFF's preseason rankings, fantasy rankings, of course, and you start to see position group stuff. And I feel like there's been a lot of Kenneth Walker slight. A lot of being overlooked. I don't know why that is. Maybe because some people feel like it's going to be a tandem with he and Zach Charbonnet, and he's not going to be a feature back. Maybe, the way throughout his first 2 seasons, he's been banged up a little bit. Maybe there's a sense out there nationally that this Ryan Grubb offense, because of what he did at UW, is going to be more wide open and isn't going to feature the running game, despite Mike Macdonald talking about what a priority it is. But the buzz is starting to grow about Kenneth Walker and how explosive he looks. And Albert Breer said he looks like the kind of back you can play on all 3 downs and build a running game around. And there have been some other comments from other beat reporters about how he certainly looks like the featured guy. And so, when they drafted Zach Charbonnet last year in the 2nd round, some people even felt, and at times I did, is Zach Charbonnet really built a little bit more to be sort of the lead back, and Ken Walker maybe more of the change of pace 3rd down guy, because Charbonnet is a little bit more of a north-south inside runner, a little bit more physical. Not that Ken Walker is not physical, not willing to put his shoulder down and take on contact. But Breer did go on to say that Charbonnet looks like an outstanding complement to Walker. But at this point anyway, really appears that Walker's in the forefront. And can't wait for the mock game, because the running backs as a whole, haven't heard anything about Kenny McIntosh's performance, where you remember last year before he injured his knee in the mock game, unfortunately, he was kind of the star of training camp. Did see today, I think it was Greg Bell who said that undrafted free agent rookie George Halani out of Boise State has impressed. So looking forward to seeing those running backs when the bullets start flying. Maybe the most encouraging thing, and the guy that universally seems to be being raved about right now, and at a position that is crucial to the success of the offense and any offense, and it's probably the best news of all to Geno Smith. And we're going to talk about the interior guys here in a moment. But Charles Cross, the 6th overall pick 2 years ago, had the outstanding rookie season where they got the bookends, right? Cross in the 1st, Lucas in the 3rd. As rookies, they started every game. Very, very unusual. Looked like the Seahawks were set up for years and years and years at the tackle position, a position that had been a source of concern for a couple years leading up to that. Now the Abe Lucas story has changed. Still waiting to find out where he's at physically. He still hasn't been able to practice. Cross had the good rookie year, although most people seem to feel like Abe Lucas had the better trajectory, the higher ceiling. And then Cross takes a step back in his 2nd year. Now, I have maintained that I'm not sure how much of that didn't have to do with the injury. He missed, 3 games, 4 games with the toe injury, and then he came back and he played the rest of the season. But those toe injuries, you hear about it all the time, especially playing on artificial turf, are a bear. And sometimes they linger. And you just have to wonder, especially at that position with a guy that big, where his footwork is such a key part of what he does, did it affect his get-off? I remember the Tennessee Titans game in particular where he was beaten badly off the edge. He just didn't get off the snap. Everyone is talking about how good Charles Cross looks this training camp. I think it was Monday when you've heard about the heavyweight championship belt that gets handed out at the end of every practice for which side of the ball wins that day. And Monday, the defense was said to have won the day. Tuesday, the offense bounced back. So they were awarded the belt, and Geno Smith said, give that belt to Charles Cross. You're hearing about how good he is in one-on-one pass drills and how good he looks overall. This is what Albert Breer said about Charles Cross, and this really opened my eyes. He says, Charles Cross has the look of a guy who could ascend to an all-pro level. All-pro. And you start talking about the left tackles in the NFL, guys who have gotten paid, and even some of the guys that are, borderline top 10, no doubt franchise left tackles. Like there's we want all of the offensive linemen to look good. We want that line to finally come together, be a strength of this team and this organization. But starting at the left tackle position is not a bad thing to do. And if Charles Cross can be the guy that we thought he had the potential to be when we saw him play as a rookie, and the guy that you'd think anyone is going to be when you select them 6 overall, or I'm sorry, was it 10th? 10th overall. That's very, very good news. Got a couple other players to talk about, including one who I think is kind of in that category with Charles Cross, is a guy that had a down second year. Now people are talking about sky's the limit for him based on his performance in camp so far. Coming up in just a moment. But first, this episode brought to you by BetUS online betting service. With BetUS, you get industry-leading betting variety. You get 24/7 customer service. You get your own personal account manager, and you get easy deposits and withdrawals. If you think the Seahawks can win the NFC West this year, here's a look at their current odds. You can get in on this action, whether you agree or disagree. If you sign up now for a BetUS account, the link is down below in the highlighted comment, and they will give you a 125% sign-up bonus up to $2,000. There are other benefits. Sign up for an account today and check that out. The sign-up is easy. It's just as easy as clicking that link. Thanks again to them for sponsoring this program. Now, on to a couple other names. I've got some honorable mention guys that I want to talk about, but one in particular to highlight. And this isn't going to come as any surprise to you if you've been paying attention to what's been going on in training camp. As much as Devin Witherspoon continues to get rave reviews for his day in, day out performance and just the way that he kind of sets the tone out there. And Albert Breer even said he wouldn't be surprised if he's voted captain this year just because of kind of the aura that he has and the way he carries himself and how he's become a leader. But the news on Riq Woolen is maybe one of the most promising things about what we're hearing about this defense. You heard G. Scott on Monday rave about the safeties, but this young cornerback group could really be a lot of fun, especially considering some things that we've learned about Mike Macdonald's defense and some of the things Leslie Frazier said recently on a national podcast where he talked about how they may travel their young corners. The old Pete Carroll scheme of one guy's a left corner, one guy's a right corner, and that's where they stay, isn't going to be the case. Richard Sherman at times would travel with the number one receiver, but very rarely. Probably can count on one hand the number of times that he did that. But it sounds like they might do that with both of these guys. It sounds like Devin Witherspoon is playing a little bit more outside. He's still playing some inside, but he's moving back and forth a little bit more than what the previous staff had him doing. And that Woolen is a guy, and he's a guy that was name dropped by Frazier on that podcast with Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks as a guy that they think can travel with number one receivers, thereby kind of leaving Devin Witherspoon to sort of be that Swiss Army knife and just wreak havoc near the line of scrimmage. But the things people are saying about Riq in this camp should give you all the confidence that you need to maybe put his second season behind him. Again, similar to Charles Cross, he had that shoulder injury, and I'm not so sure that didn't play a huge role, even though he played through it, in particular in the running game and the criticism that he took for his poor performance there, and especially a lot of missed tackles, right? And maybe even some hesitance to get up and get involved in the run game. Michael Sean Dugar was on the show last week. You heard him talking about him, but recently in his column on The Athletic, said he looks closer to his rookie year form, if not better. Says this entire training camp, he has only observed one long ball completed on Woolen, and it required a spectacular catch from DK Metcalf, who was covered well on the play. He said his underneath routes, that coverage has been equally as impressive. Albert Breer, again, chiming in, says, those here are encouraged that the wildly talented Woolen will bounce back from a shaky 2023 campaign. And then Mike Macdonald himself, the head coach, spoke after practice on Tuesday and was asked about Riq. And I can't show you the video, but I'm going to play this audio, and then I'll describe it a little bit. And this audio, in the middle, there's a pretty large pause on his part where he gathers his thoughts. I left it in there, so I want to let you know it's there. I left the pause in. Normally when I'm editing a long soundbite, if there's a pause from someone, I'll take it out, tighten it up. Not this time. And then I'll explain. This is Mike Macdonald when asked about Riq Woolen.
I see iron sharpening iron out there when he's going against the Wild, especially DK. But just someone that's on a mission, and he's responding to the coaching and he's bought in, and I think the players are excited about him. So I don't want to oversell it right now, but I think you can sense our excitement about him.
So that pause in the middle wasn't because he was he was being overtaken by all the kids playing in the background. I think when you watch the video and go to the Seahawks YouTube page, all their press conferences are there. It's from Tuesday, the 30th. He pauses, he kind of catches himself, and then he says, I don't want to give too much away. And as he's doing that, he's fighting back a smile. He starts off that comment smiling. Iron sharpens iron. Like big grin on his face. And then near the end, it's the same thing. You can see the look on his face when he says, I don't want to give too much away. I think that pause was to gather himself and make sure that he doesn't heap too much praise on him. Kind of wants to keep it under wraps maybe a little bit. But it's palpable. You can see the enthusiasm and feel it from Coach Macdonald when talking about Riq Woolen and his performance so far in camp. And remember, heading into last season, he wasn't 100% healthy. He had the little knee early in the offseason last year. He had the knee procedure. So he didn't participate in a lot of the OTAs or the mini camps. Came back for training camp. They really had to ease him in. And that may have set his development back a little bit. So very, very encouraged about what they're saying about Riq Woolen coming out of this training camp. A couple of other honorable mention guys, and some of these guys are the ones that some of you asked about in the comments on Monday. A lot of people talking about Derek Hall and how he looks ready for a second-year breakout, that he seems more comfortable, quicker on his reactions. He's a physical player. We know that's his game. He's not a quick twitch guy, but coaches are raving about him. Reporters that are watching him are raving about him. Uchenna Nwosu went on a long tangent about him in an interview the other day about how good Derek Hall looks. Great to hear, especially considering that he's considered a much better run defender than Darrell Taylor, right? Who now looks to be the fourth guy, maybe even the fifth, depending on how much Draymond Jones is going to play the edge in that rotation. Maybe he's poised for a Boye Mafe type second season. Mike Morris is another guy. And he's one that if you've watched the show for any length of time, you know he's been a favorite of mine since he was drafted. He was one of my guys in the draft. I was really hoping they'd take him on day 3. They did. He flashed in the preseason, certainly showed all the things that you look forward to seeing from him with all of his length and just his motor and just hair on fire play style. And then he hurt his shoulder and had to spend his entire rookie year on injured reserve. He's been healthy this offseason, but haven't heard much about him. But again, pads go on, and a guy like this is going to take advantage of that because he's unique along that defensive line. No one else is built like him. 6'5", who knows how much he weighs. He was up to 305 as a rookie because they planned to play him more inside. And this staff also is going to use him inside and out, but it sure looks like when you see practice video that he's a little leaner than 305. You know, he's kind of been all over the place, right? He played at, I think, 280, 285 at Michigan. Then he got down to 270, 275 for the combine, thinking that would help his testing scores. He didn't have a good combine and then bulked back up again after the Seahawks drafted him. He's been featured in, when the Seahawks go big, there's a group that they've been putting out there, according to reports, with the big edges being Jaron Reed and Leonard Williams, and then the two inside guys being Jonathan Hankins and Mike Morris. Now, Cam Young's coming back off an injury. He's going to figure into that rotation a little bit as well. But certainly it looks like Morris is going to have a role. Now, he's out right now, too, banged up his elbow the other day. Thankfully, it doesn't sound like it's anything serious. One report did erroneously state that it was his shoulder, which obviously made me nervous considering last year, but it's not. Apparently it's his elbow. So he should be back soon. Couple other kind of deeper guys on the roster. Mike Jarrell, the 6th-round draft pick at offensive tackle. Small school guy, developmental guy, right? Physical specimen. Hadn't heard a lot about him. He really shined in one-on-one pass rush drills on Monday and Tuesday, as well as a bunch of the other interior offensive linemen. I told you I would touch on them, and that's where a lot of the concern is from people, right? But according to multiple reports, Christian Haynes, the 81st pick in the draft this year out of Connecticut, Olu Oluwatimi, the presumptive starting center, still no update or any new word on Connor Williams' status. Haven't seen him taking any visits anywhere else. Seahawks were said to have done a physical with him. He passed that and maybe even negotiating, but he's just sitting out there still. But Olu Oluwatimi and Anthony Bradford, who's now healthy finally after being banged up all offseason, all looked good in one-on-ones, as well as Michael Jarrell. The interesting thing about Haynes, I want to give him a mention here too, is that he got some run at left guard on Tuesday, and that's notable. Now, the reason he was switched over there is because they gave Laken Tomlinson a veteran's day off, just a rest day. By all accounts, it sounds like Tomlinson is going to be the guy at left guard. Christian Haynes has only ever played right guard. In fact, E.J. Snyder on the Bootleg podcast recently said he was the best pure right guard in the draft. There were other guys who had some positional versatility that he thought might be better if they played right guard, but he was the best pure right guard in the league in the draft. So the fact that they're working him at left guard really opens up some possibilities, because kind of sounds like Anthony Bradford is holding down right guard at this point. Another guy that I've got here as an honorable mention that's getting a lot of positive reviews about how he's held up in one-on-one pass drills and also in the team portion. If Anthony Bradford should seize that spot, just a year ago, he started 10 games, right? He's kind of the forgotten man. There's some assumption, and I've been guilty of this as well, that maybe he wasn't a great fit for this scheme if they plan on running a lot of outside zone, because second level agility and athletic explosion, those aren't really his traits. Known more as a mauler, but a guy who's also shown some ability in pass protection. If he's holding down right guard, then even if Laken Tomlinson should start the year as the starting left guard, the fact that Christian Haynes can get comfortable at left guard could be huge for this offensive line moving forward. You might be talking about maybe your two long-term guards being in place. I had thought, I think I've said it here before, that it would make more sense maybe to try Anthony Bradford out at left guard, because he played a bunch of left tackle at LSU. And some guys, especially given that Haynes has only played right guard at Connecticut, some guys are comfortable making the switch and some aren't. But it's Haynes that they're trying out at left guard. And apparently he looked really good on Tuesday in pads and in full team drills. Another guy, and every year there's always a receiver, right? Every year. Who was it last year? The kid from Arkansas, Matt. Was it Matt Thompson? Big, long, lanky speedster. Made a lot of noise early on. Obviously, Jake Bobo had, as an undrafted guy, made the team and now continues to look like someone who's going to be the fourth receiver and a guy that's going to have a role. And he had, I'm sure you've all seen the touchdown catch on Monday, I believe it was, from Sam Howell, laying out fully and making an incredible catch. If you haven't seen it, go to the Seattle Seahawks official Twitter page and scroll down a little bit. You'll find it. It's fantastic. But every year there are receivers that flash. This year it's Cody White. No, not Cody Thompson, who was kind of the sort of 6th, 7th receiver guy hanging out on the practice squad, bouncing back and forth between that and the active roster for the last 3-4 years, finally moved on this offseason. Cody White, undrafted in 2020, has really bounced around the league, been cut a ton of times. But another guy, size, speed specimen, 6'3", 207. He's a guy that teammates in particular keep talking about, that he just keeps making plays. And Tyler Lockett was raving about him this week. And that it's not just a flash that's happening this week, that he has had dominant moments all throughout OTAs and minicamp ever since he was signed. So lots and lots of good news, and I could go on and on and on. There are other players, but I don't know. It would be kind of a boring episode if I just listed every player on the roster, right? And again, this all has to be taken with a grain of salt, because if you go training camp to training camp to training camp, every fan base is really optimistic about their team right now, for the most part, and especially particular players that might flash in a practice or two. Now, not all the news is great. Mike Macdonald this week did talk about how it's not all dialed in yet, right? It's not perfect. His exact quote is, we are, I won't say far away, but we're a ways out right now. And in particular, he was disappointed this week. He had identified that his defense wasn't quick enough to identify things and make defensive calls at the line of scrimmage. So one of the things he did, and this got a lot of attention yesterday, I thought this was really cool, is he does these things called mystery situations, where usually all of practice is scripted, all of it. And you know, when you hear that horn go off, that's when they're changing periods. And each period is a specific set of tasks. It's all planned out ahead of time. The players know it. They have meetings ahead of time. Here's how practice is going to go. It's an itinerary. But he throws these surprises at them. And in this particular mystery situation on Tuesday, with the pads on 11, he threw a 3rd and goal, or a red zone situation. It was 3rd and 8 in the red zone. The coaches didn't even know. So there's no plan, no prep. And they just go with it in the moment. And he says that the point of this is to learn to deal with situations that are unexpected. Because even in the course of a game, you spend the entire week game planning. You have your whole call sheet worked out. Every situation, here are the plays. Something's going to come up at some point that you're not expecting. You might be in the shadow of your own goalpost, and suddenly you break a 70-yard run. You're in the red zone sooner than you thought it was going to happen. Maybe late in a half, you didn't think it was, and you have to adapt on the fly. Those are the kinds of situations he throws at his team, and he did that on Tuesday. And by all accounts, he was pleased with how it went. But I just think that's really cool. There were also some player personnel changes. Undrafted free agent rookie inside linebacker Easton Gibbs out of Wyoming was released this week. Kind of a bummer. He was a guy that got some buzz in the offseason as someone that might have an outside shot to make the team. He was someone that Michael Thompson from 12th Man Rising told me about during the college football season as sort of a guy to keep your eye on that he thought would fit here. Now, he had started training camp on the non-football injury list, so maybe he just had a physical thing that just he couldn't get past. It'd be interesting to see if maybe at some point, maybe they bring him back and he ends up on the practice squad, or if he lands somewhere else. But it also might speak to how they're feeling about the rest of that inside linebacker group. And haven't really, for all these guys I just listed today that are standing out, right? Haven't heard much about Jerome Baker and Terrell Dodson, other than they've been out there every day and they're healthy, which is good. But I found it interesting that even though those guys are still out there and they are the presumed starters at those positions, that Tyrese Knight, 4th-round draft pick out of UTEP, and John Radigan, the 4th-year veteran out of Army, they're getting first-team reps. Those were the guys, along with Patrick O'Connell, who were getting most of the first-team reps in place of Dodson and Baker when they missed the offseason. But they're rotating those guys in. But a little bit of a bummer, because I thought Easton Gibbs had some upside, although the knock on him was not an explosive athlete. Just the athletic profile might have just limited his ceiling to the point that they had seen enough and thought it was time to move on. What do you think? Any guys I missed? Anyone that you've heard something about that you'd like to pass along as well? Which of these guys, if you had to pick one of the players that I listed today that you're most excited about, that you think has the chance to contribute the most to this team being good, who is it? And then I'll, as always, continue to ask. I am going to go to the mock game on Saturday. I will then do a live reaction show Saturday night. So the game's at 1, probably wrap up around 3, if not a little sooner. So maybe around 4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, look for a reaction show from me about what I see. Can't take video this year. Last year I was able to, and it was cool. Was able to do some shows and get some reaction to that. I remember I had Maddie Brown on to analyze some of the videos, Sanjit T. Can't do that this year, but I'll certainly take notes and pass along things that I see and my thoughts from Saturday. Also, tomorrow I'll do a little bit of a preview of sorts, get you ready for the mock game, and give you some sort of things to watch for that I'm looking to see on Saturday. One last time before we go, shout out to BetUS for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching and subscribing. And again, all the different ways that you can support the show are down in the description. Stephen Douglas and Company, their new EP coming out soon. You can find them on Spotify. Good friend of mine and a very talented musician. That's him you'll hear in the background as we take you out once again. I'm Dan, at Seahawks Forever is my Twitter handle. Be sure to follow me there. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.
Get me high, deal with society. When I got you in my veins, there's nothing more